The walls of the small house in Stoddart, one of Harari's oldest neighborhoods, trembled with the sound of raised voices. Once again, Matilda and her husband, Ronald, were locked in a heated argument, one of many that had become a daily routine in their troubled home. "You don't even look at me the same way anymore," Matilda snapped, arms crossed, her voice shaking with frustration. "And you don't listen," Ronald shot back. "All you do is complain. Do you think money just appears? I work all day and all I get is this." Their daughter, little Sandra, sat quietly in the corner, her small hands clutching her teddy bear. She had heard this argument too many times. She wanted to cry, but she had learned that no one would listen. Ronald stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Matilda, left standing in the middle of their spacious home, let out a deep sigh. She was tired. Tired of the fights, tired of feeling unappreciated. She decided to call her friends, Jackie and Samantha. She met up with them at a high-end restaurant in town. The music was loud, the air thick with expensive perfume and laughter. "You need to stop stressing," her best friend Jackie told her. "You're too beautiful for all this suffering." "Isn't it, Samantha?" "Yeah," Samantha added. "Why stay in a marriage where you're not being treated like a queen?" While they were eating, a good-looking man passed, looking straight into Matilda's eyes. "Did you see that, Jackie?" Samantha asked. "What?" Matilda and Jackie asked. Simba walked in, staring at Matilda. "I think he likes you, Matilda," she said. That was the first night Matilda heard the name Simba. "He's the most generous man in the city," Samantha whispered. "He helps everyone. He gives people money, buys cars for strangers. Just last week he paid school fees for 100 kids. He's the kind of man women pray for." At first, Matilda wasn't interested. But later that night, as she lay awake in bed, she thought about it. A man with that much kindness, that much wealth, maybe, just maybe, she deserved to meet someone like him. She was once a proud and happy wife, but troubles in her marriage had left her feeling lost. Her husband had grown cold and distant, and instead of finding solutions, she had begun to spend her days in the company of friends, seeking comfort in laughter and distractions. Weeks passed, and everywhere Matilda went, she heard about Simba's generosity. He was the man who drove through the city in a Rolls-Royce Phantom, handing out money to those in need. The man who walked into a car dealership and bought Mercedes-Benz cars for random people. The man who tipped waiters with stacks of US dollars just for smiling. On social media, videos of his kindness flooded the internet. "This man changed my life," one woman said. "Simba is proof that good people still exist," another post read. The entire city adored him. People greeted him with admiration, businesses offered him free services, and politicians spoke of him with respect. One evening, Matilda finally met him. After a heated argument with her husband, she left the house and drove straight to the bar. She had been sitting alone at a rooftop bar watching the city lights when a deep, smooth voice greeted her. "May I join you?" She looked up and there he was, dressed in an all-white designer suit, a gold watch gleaming under the city lights. His presence commanded attention. "Simba," she breathed. He smiled. "I've heard about you, Matilda. You have the kind of beauty that makes men forget their problems." She blushed. From that night on, Matilda's life changed. Simba was kind to her, always listening to her woes, always offering advice. He invited her into his grand palace, where gold sparkled on every wall and servants obeyed his every command. Matilda, enchanted by his kindness and wealth, felt herself drawn to him. She confided in him, leaned on him, and soon she began to trust him completely. But when Simba learned that Matilda had a daughter, his true interest was not in Matilda. His gaze had settled on her daughter, a bright-eyed little girl, Sandra. She was only 7 years old, full of life and laughter. She had no idea that the man her mother admired so much harbored a sinister secret. Simba's wealth blinded Matilda. One evening he made her an offer. "Let me take care of you and your daughter," he said smoothly. "I can provide for you in ways your husband never could. You will never have to worry about anything again." Matilda, desperate to escape her unhappy life, did not hesitate. She agreed without a second thought. She no longer worried about bills, about arguments, about stress. She felt alive again. Simba showered her with gifts, diamond necklaces, designer handbags, and first-class trips to Dubai. He bought her a brand new Bentley Bentayga just because she had once mentioned she liked it. He showered Matilda with so much luxury that she never questioned anything. Then, slowly, he started spending time alone with the child. "Your mommy is very lucky," he would say, smiling down at her. "You're lucky too, Sandra." But the little girl felt something was wrong. She didn't like the way he looked at her, the way he held her hand for too long. One night, Matilda left Sandra in Simba's care, believing she was securing a better future for her child. When she returned the next day, after a trip from Singapore, something in Sandra had changed. The child, who had once been so full of joy, was silent. Her eyes, once bright, were now hollow. She would not meet her mother's gaze, nor would she speak of what had happened, but Matilda barely noticed. She was too busy living the dream. And then the nightmares started. She would wake up screaming, trembling, her small body covered in sweat. "Mommy, I don't want to stay with him," she cried one night. Matilda, sipping champagne in their luxury penthouse, dismissed it. "Don't be silly, baby. Uncle Simba is good to us." As days passed, Sandra grew more withdrawn. She no longer played with her dolls, no longer laughed at stories. At night, she woke up every day screaming, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy, I'm scared," she would whisper. "Please don't leave me with him again." As always, Matilda dismissed it, telling herself that the child was simply adjusting to their new life of luxury. But deep inside, a terrible fear began to grow. But what Matilda didn't know, what no one knew, was the truth behind Simba's generosity. Long ago, he had travelled to a neighbouring country in search of power and wealth. There, he had met a powerful traditional doctor who promised him riches beyond imagination. But wealth this great comes at a price, the doctor had warned. Simba had agreed without hesitation. And that price was unthinkable. He had to make a dark offering. And not just once, every few years, ensuring no one ever suspected a thing. He had to follow the rituals precisely, or his riches would vanish like smoke in the wind. For years, he had chosen vulnerable children from struggling mothers who trusted him, and now his sights were set on little Sandra. One night, Matilda came home earlier than expected. She walked into the house, humming, when she noticed something strange. Sandra's door was slightly open. She stepped closer, and then she saw him. Simba was inside. His back was turned to her, his hands reaching toward her daughter. For a moment, Matilda couldn't breathe. Then, reality hit her like a train. The luxury, the gifts, the kindness. It was all built on something far more sinister. "Get away from her!" she screamed. Simba turned sharply, his usual charming mask slipping to reveal his true nature. His eyes burned with fury as he took a step toward Matilda. "You should have stayed blind," he snarled. But Matilda was no longer blind. The veil of luxury, gifts, and false kindness had been ripped away. She clutched Sandra tightly, shielding her trembling daughter behind her. With a burst of adrenaline, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass vase, and hurled it at Simba. It shattered against his shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a curse. She didn't wait to see his reaction. She grabbed Sandra's hand and bolted out of the house, her heart pounding against her ribs. Mommy, I'm scared, Sandra sobbed as they ran. I know, baby, I know, Matilda whispered, her voice breaking. She didn't stop running until she reached her car. Her hands shook violently as she fumbled with the keys, but she managed to start the engine and speed off into the night. Her mind raced. She had to expose him. She had to warn others. But who would believe her? Simba wasn't just some wealthy man. He was a city icon. People adored him. They worshipped him. Would they listen to a woman they would call bitter? A woman they would accuse of lying because she had once enjoyed his wealth? But she didn't care. She had almost risked her daughter's safety for greed. She wouldn't stay silent. She drove straight to the police station. At first, the officers were skeptical. "You're accusing Simba, the same man who feeds the poor?" one of them asked, raising an eyebrow. "Do you have any proof?" another questioned. Tears filled Matilda's eyes as she held Sandra close. "My daughter is proof," she said, her voice trembling. "She won't talk. She won't eat. She wakes up screaming every night. Something terrible happened." One of the officers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, knelt beside Sandra. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "can you tell us what happened?" But Sandra only shook her head and buried her face in her mother's arms. Still, the accusation alone was enough to stir interest. Rumors spread like wildfire. People who had once praised Simba's generosity started whispering. Women who had left their children in his care came forward with their own suspicions. And then, one brave girl, now a teenager, came forward with a chilling confession. Years ago, when she was just a child, her mother had also trusted Simba. He had taken her on shopping sprees, bought her expensive gifts and told her she was special. But behind the golden doors of his mansion, she had discovered his dark truth. Her words shook the city. The police launched an investigation. They raided Simba's properties and discovered horrifying evidence, hidden cameras, missing children's belongings, and even journal entries that hinted at ritualistic practices. Simba, once untouchable, was now a hunted man. The city that had worshipped him turned against him overnight. Businesses that once offered him free services cut all ties. Politicians who had praised him now distanced themselves. Even his most loyal friends refused to take his calls. And then, the strangest thing happened. His wealth, his seemingly endless fortune, began to disappear. His Rolls-Royce was repossessed. His mansion, once filled with gold, was stripped bare. It was as if an unseen force was taking back everything he had gained. The entities he had once bargained with were collecting their price. Simba tried to run, but he had nowhere to go. The police finally caught him hiding in a run-down guest house on the outskirts of the city. His expensive suit now torn, his once polished shoes covered in dust. The great Simba, who had once walked the streets with power and pride, was dragged through the mud as he was arrested. As he was led into the police station, a crowd gathered outside, hurling insults and curses at him. "You betrayed us!" they shouted. "You destroyed lives." But Simba only stared ahead, his face void of emotion. He knew. He knew his time was up. The trial was long and painful. Victims came forward, their voices shaking but strong, Matilda testified, tears streaming down her face as she admitted how blind she had been. She begged the court to believe them. And they did. Simba was found guilty of unspeakable crimes, acts so vile that even the wealth he had once possessed could not save him. He was sentenced to life in prison, and just like that, the legend of Simba was erased. His name became a curse, a warning whispered in hushed voices. But for Matilda, the nightmare wasn't over. She had lost herself in greed, and in doing so, she had almost lost her daughter. She spent years making it up to Sandra, pouring all her love and energy into healing the wounds she had helped create. She dedicated her life to helping other women, warning them against men like Simba, men who seemed too good to be true. And as for Simba, no one truly knows what happened to him in prison. Some say he lost his mind. Some say he tried to perform rituals behind bars, hoping to restore his lost wealth. But the forces he had once relied on had abandoned him. The wealth he had sacrificed so much for had vanished, leaving him with nothing but his sins. And so, the story of Simba became a warning, passed down through generations. The elders would say, "Beware of the man who gives too freely, for he may be taking more than you can see." Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of the African folktales we post.